It was just over 90 minutes beyond President Bush's deadline for Saddam Hussein to leave Iraq that U.S. warships and planes launched the opening salvo of Operation Iraqi Freedom.
The year is 2003. America prepares for war. President George W. Bush has declared that Iraq is building weapons of mass destruction with which to attack America, and that the only possible response is a preemptive invasion. The administration's case is transparently flimsy and dishonest, both on the evidence and the ethical justification. And though the country is still reeling in shock from 9/11, the anti-war movement manages to organize massive protests. Roughly 32 million people participate worldwide over the course of 4 months, to no avail. America invades against all good judgment or reason, a tragic boondoggle that would eventually prove everyone's worst fears completely true and spark a new dark era of global politics. There is despair among the anti-war left, but they did have one silver lining. Not much of a silver lining in light of historic crime unfolding, but a silver lining nonetheless. A silver lining we heard many people clinging to in those awful days.
Extremists are in the White House! The extremists are in the Pentagon!
At least we're going to get a lot of great music. Hello?
Yeah, hi, I was just listening to the video. Did you literally just steal the entire intro from my Madonna Train Records video? Like, verbatim?
No! Well, yes, but you totally ripped off the format for the introduction to my Rent video.
Oh yeah, I guess I kind of did. Okay, does that make this a collaboration? I thought people didn't do video collabs anymore.
No, see, it turns out that like most YouTubers never stopped doing that. We just did because, you know, you never know who's gonna have a Twitter meltdown and you don't want to have to be doing like apologies by proxy.
Oh yeah, that is why we stopped. And no other reason.
No other reason. So anyway, well, it's been a minute, hasn't it? So I have this book coming out next month, pre-order link in the description, and one of the more common questions I get, besides what the hell is wrong with you, is why did you decide to set it in the 2000s instead of, you know, the nebulous present now, you know, whatever this is. And to that I say, you know, besides the fact that nothing makes sense in our current hell world, it makes sense in context. It was a very different time. So the idea for this episode came about while I was actually writing it, and I was making all these playlists for, you know, mood. There's also a link to my main playlist in the description. It's full of mid-2000s cheese, if that's what you need to get you through this time. And listening to that sort of thing made me think a lot about, you know, the resistance music of that era, or lack thereof. So while I had been working on this for a while, I was going to put it out later, you know, to be more of like a tie-in release thing, but then the topic of protests had to go and get all topical, so this got bumped up. So obviously the topic of music and music history isn't exactly my wheelhouse, so I wrote this with some consulting from our good friend Todd in the Shadows.
Thank you for the plug. And if you like books, check out the new novel, Axiom's End, by my close personal friend, Lindsay Ellis.
Gee, thanks. So before we get into the era at hand, first let's take a quick look at the history of protest music. Protest music can be found in pretty much every culture throughout the world, but you're much more likely to find it in cultures that are, you know, like oppressed and colonized. Ireland, for instance, has a very long, proud history of protest songs, from Irish language songs like Oro Shedava Hawaya to more recent ones like Kevin Barry.
For I fought for Ireland's freedom on that cold September morn.
And it ranges all over the world, to the anti-apartheid music movement spearheaded by Black South African musicians like Hugh Masekela, all the way to broader genres of music like British punk rock a la The Clash.
Murder is a crime. Unless you must die. My policeman.
All the way to Yankee Goddamn Doodle Dandy.
Yankee Doodle went to town riding on a pony, stuck a feather in his cap and called it macaroni.
Yeah, so early American protest music was like basically taking British diss tracks and being like, yeah, our hats are stupid. We're proud of that.
Yankee Doodle, keep it up. Yankee Doodle dandy, mind the music
Now, protest songs have been written and attached to movements of all sorts, from anti-racism to feminism to gay rights to literally nothing.
Into a crisis times when I'm lying in bed just to for revolution.
You know, a revolution. Praying for it. Every day. Stop singing this at karaoke.
My country is full of lies, we all gonna die.
But the common thread between most protest songs is that they, for obvious reasons, tend to come about in times of mass disenfranchisement or injustice. So the assumption that, hey, shit might be bad and we're all in agreement about that, therefore it's time for some great art that captures the zeitgeist of the now is not unfounded. But what is the basis of this assumption in America specifically?
Out there, the enemy is creeping in. He will try to overrun the American positions. The waiting is agony.
When people think of American protest music and pop songs, they're probably thinking of the music of the late 1960s and early 1970s, specifically music surrounding the Vietnam War. But what was it about this war that was different from that which became before and after? Well, the roots of the Vietnam War stretch back into the 19th century, and it was one of those conflicts that even now people have a hard time explaining what it was really about, other than, the vague proxy war, something communism.
Lieutenant Dan, ice cream.
And that's not, completely wrong, but like most war-related topics, taking a complex issue and simplifying it is not easy. So to keep it simple, we have this really long, nebulous war. Nobody really knows what we're fighting for. It results in the deaths of millions of Vietnamese people by some counts, and 58,000 US troops.
I think all the decent people in this country have decided this war is an absurdity and immoral, and it's time to bring it to a halt.
We spend $322,000 for each enemy we kill in Vietnam.
Well, all I can say is I'm not as patriotic as I used to be.
As you can imagine, this sits very poorly with people all over the world, including people inside the United States, who genuinely do not understand why this is a conflict that should involve the US military at all. And that brings us to...
A 1, 2, 3, 4.
There was a wide array of protest music that came out of this war. Bands like Creedence Clearwater Revival, artists like Donovan, John Lennon, and Cat Stevens are all letting it out.
Peace train sounding loud, ride on the peace train.
Some of this music is critical and angry of the war effort in the military, but on the whole, the aesthetic trends more towards pleading for peace.
All we are saying is give peace a chance.
Creedence Clearwater Revival's Fortunate Son is of course emblematic of the audio aesthetic when we think of music of the Vietnam War. Even the succinctly titled by Edwin Starr is pretty broad and less about America as a military machine. But again, all of this reflects a general sense that we don't know why we're fighting in Vietnam. And this is a problem to this day. This is completely anecdotal, but both of the writers of this episode, whenever it got to Vietnam time in our history classes, we spent maybe one day on it, and that was it. Moving on, let's get to Watergate. So with Vietnam, not only did you have a wildly unpopular draft, you had a war where most American randos didn't really see that the cost was worth it. There wasn't really a cause and effect for why we should be there in the first place. Contrast this with 2001, where...
This is as close as we can get to the base of the World Trade Center. You can see the firemen assembled here, the police officers, FBI agents, and you can see the two towers. A huge explosion now raining debris.
9/11 was one of the most collectively traumatic events in US history, and unlike combat in Vietnam, it was witnessed in real time by virtually everyone in the country. So, rational or no, and it was not rational, there was a specific thing that was being responded to before the war in Iraq, which was why it was so easy for Bush to get so much of the public at large on board in the first place.
American and coalition forces are in the early stages of military operations to disarm Iraq, to free its people, and to defend the world from grave danger.
So you know what that means. We saw it in the 60s and 70s, and we're about to see it again. It's not just our direct action and our protests that's going to change the world. It's our music. It's our art. Let's go. What do we got?
'Cause we'll put a boot in your ass. It's the American way.
Probably should have seen that coming. For the last few months of 2001 and early 2002, there was this strange sort of sincerity that was, I don't know, kind of like the same vibe that was Kate McKinnon cosplaying as Hillary Clinton singing Hallelujah on the first SNL after the 2016 election.
The first signs of trouble, the dust and the rubble, unspeakable loss.
There were songs like Paul McCartney's Freedom, Neil Young's Let's Roll, and hey, Bruce Springsteen made an entire album that was basically him processing 9/11. But processing the thing through art did not come without resistance to the, resistance.
Man, we lit up your world like the 4th of July.
The above example is called Courtesy of the Red, White, and Blue, parentheses, The Angry American, end parentheses, end quote, and was released in the spring of 2002 and was much more emblematic of music of the era than In the months following 9/11, we saw a lot of jingoism bleed into the arts.
I hear people say we don't need this war, but I say there's some things worth fighting for.
A lot of Kiss My American Ass Were Number One sentiment hit the airwaves, most pervasively in top 50 country music. There were songs like Steve Curtis Chapman's Remember the Day, Daryl Worley's Have You Forgotten.
They say we don't realize the mess we're getting in.
And of course, Toby Keith's Courtesy of the Red, White, and Blue, parentheses, The Angry American, close parentheses.
And you'll be sorry that you mess with the U.S. of A.
And that was kind of new. With Vietnam, there wasn't really like a pro-war movement in America. It was more like anti-war, like these hippies and Jane Fonda need to shut up and get off my lawn. And even during World War II, which had a much more concerted and organized government propaganda campaign, much of the music of the era was about like, tee-hee, soldiers are cute.
Ice cold Katie, why don't you marry that soldier?
Soon he'll march away.
The music of that war wasn't really marked by a thirst for revenge.
'Cause we'll put a boot in your ass, it's the American way.
So with this jingoism comes a sort of reluctance to make any kind of mainstream art about the thing that is critical of the United States government in any capacity. For example, Michael Moore criticizing Bush at the 2003 Oscars got him booed.
We live in a time where we have a man sending us to war for fictitious reasons, whether it's the fictition of duct tape or the fictitious of orange alerts.
Opposing the war in Iraq got him booed at the Oscars by these people. So this was around the same time the Congress cafeteria stopped selling French fries and started calling them freedom fries, because France did not want to join the invasion. Not like our buddies the British over here, they were all about it. Our friends the British, with us at every stupid turn. The special relationship.
Thank you for being a friend.
But these transgressions were all minor cultural blips compared to So right before the Iraq invasion, Texas country trio the Dixie Chicks, who were at the height of their popularity, were kicking off their 2003 world tour in London and opened their concert with this.
Just so you know, we're on the good side with y'all. We do not want war. We're ashamed of the President of the United States.
And it all went to hell from there. Thousands of phone calls flooded country music radio stations from Denver to Nashville, calls demanding that the Dixie Chicks be removed from the station's playlists. Their single at the time, a cover of Fleetwood Mac's Landslide, dropped off the charts almost immediately. The American Red Cross refused a promotional partnership with them.
The Red Cross wouldn't take $1 million from us.
Fans burned CDs, and of course, death threats. Lots and lots of death threats.
Says Natalie Maines will be shot dead Sunday, July 6th.
Lead singer Natalie Maines tried to apologize, but the damage was done, marking the Dixie Chicks as a cautionary tale for people who tried to oppose the president. And they didn't even sing about anything. And although it turned the Dixie Chicks into the literal face of the resistance, and they have released some new music fairly recently, their careers never really recovered to the pre-Bush bad glory days. But the short-term result, at least as far as the next several years went, was that musicians were extremely bearish about criticizing the status quo. Which brings us to the audio aesthetic of the early 2000s. Compare this to the late 1960s, where the sound is, kind of gritty and raw and honest, but also kind of tongue-in-cheek and clever. If I had to, succinctly describe the mood of pop music of that era, I'd say it was dumb.
Alright, now lose it. Just lose it. Go shorty, it's your birthday.
It was big and dumb and loud.
He was a skater boy, she said, see you later, boy.
Big and dumb and loud.
Charge my milkshake brings all the boys to the yard, and they're like, it's better than yours.
You didn't have these moody, thoughtful pop stars like you have now, and the ones you did have were like, I don't know, Evanescence. In the months and years that followed the Dixie Chicksening, pop stars kind of responded to the thing by not really saying anything. Madonna released her lead single from her album American Life, American Life, in which she sings about how hollow the American dream is because she's not satisfied with her life despite having agents and nannies and soy lattes.
I'm drinking a soy latte, I get a double shot it goes through my body and you know I'm satisfied.
All set to this backdrop. Or rather, this was originally the music video. It got scrapped because Madonna chickened out after the invasion went ahead.
A cynic might say there's got to be some money involved here. Okay, but wait, they took the Dixie Chicks CDs and they smashed them in the streets, and radio stations stopped playing them. You got a brand new important album coming out. What if people don't buy it?
That's not the reason. I give you my honest to God promise that that is not the reason.
So what was released was just her in front of a bad green screen and, flags.
I drive my Mini Cooper and I'm feeling super duper.
Similarly, we have Jewel's album track from her album 0304, simply titled America.
We are living in America. We're getting in America. We're tripping in America.
Literally, we live in a society. So arguably the best we got out of 2003 was the Black Eyed Peas.
Overseas, yeah, we trying to stop terrorism, but we still got terrorists here living in the USA, the big CIA, the Bloods and the Crips and the KKK. But
it was more in the vein of protest songs that sort of vaguely plead for peace.
People killing, people dying, children hurt and living crying. When you practice what you preach and what you turn the other cheek.
So one might say that this was the last gasp of the thoughtful peas. Before the My Humps era.
What you gonna do with all that breasts inside that shirt?
I'ma make you work. But was that it? Was everyone else too scared to try? No. Attempts were made. In 2004, there was an entire double album called Rock Against Bush. Of course, the albums consist mostly of artists that were either no longer relevant or you had never heard of. Plus, that cover art is fantastic. It's like, oh no, not the rock and roll! And while they did have some songs written for the album, many were repurposed from earlier albums, like this Offspring song from 1992. Perhaps one of the more fondly remembered efforts comes from System of a Down, with their song BYOB, or Bring Your Own Bombs. This is funnier in hindsight considering what the drummer currently feels compelled to share. For something even more on the nose, A Perfect Circle released a single called Counting Bodies Like Sheep to the Rhythm of the War Drums in 2004. subtle. I don't get it. I don't get what you're trying to tell me.
Go back to sleep.
It's too vague. Neil Young released an album called Living with War and wrote a song straight up called Let's Impeach the President.
Let's impeach the president for life. And mislead our country into war.
There's a similar call in the Beastie Boys' 2004 song, It Takes Time to Build.
We got a president we didn't elect. The Kyoto Treaty he decided to neglect. And still the U.S. just wants to flex.
From Pearl Jam, we got Bush Leaguer.
He's not a leader, he's a Texas leaguer. Swinging for the fence, got lucky with a strike.
The song is also terrible.
I remember when you sang that song.
Even Eminem got in on it.
They tell us no, we say yeah. They tell us stop, we say go. Rebel with a rebel yell. Raise hell, we gon' let them know. Storm, push, shove, mush, fuck, push.
And for all of Eminem's early controversies, I feel like everyone has forgotten the fact that Eminem was investigated by the Secret Service for some of his lyrics.
Fuck money, I don't rap for dead presidents. I'd rather see the president dead. It's never been said, but I set precedents.
Yeah, totally out of character for Eminem to fantasize doing murder in his raps. A single with a video, Mosh, was released in 2004 before the election as a plea to vote Bush out of office.
And we're responsible for this monster, this coward that we have empowered.
And we see stuff like this from Eminem now.
This is for Colin. Ball up a fist and keep that shit balled like Donald the bitch.
But at the time, the music video was incredibly serious and somber for him. For comparison, this was released right after Just Lose It, Eminem's goofiest and worst song ever?
Oops, my CD just skipped, and everyone just heard you let one rip.
Yeah, I might be going with ever. So yeah, you might notice that this is mostly white dudes and alt-rock. And white dudes doing alt-rock. There was indie darling Nellie McKay, who I think was meant to be a big pop star, sort of anti-Norah Jones.
Yeah, I love my coffee black. Hey, look, we're bombing Iraq.
But then the label kind of pulled funding for the marketing of her album, probably because of lines like this.
Control my hissy with pride. Look at my hair dyed, but all the others are white on. I don't want to say die, motherfucker.
But these were not mainstream. The aforementioned were not exactly top 40 singles. With one notable exception. Yep, it's the moment you've all been waiting for. Yes, the definitive anti-war album of the Iraq War era comes from aging garage punk guyliner burnouts Green Day.
Don't wanna be an American idiot.
At least that's how I felt at the time. I say aging, but, you know, fuck's sake, Billy Joe Armstrong was 32.
Do you have the time to listen to me whine?
So for a quick Green Day rundown, this was their breakout hit.
When masturbation's lost its fun,
Their brand was like extremely young and not very smart. Return of the bratty, snot-nosed punk. They were a lot less miserable than grunge, more just bored and frustrated, lazy and aimless, trapped in the dirt town with nothing to do. The perfect encapsulation of mid-90s ennui. And then came the huge hit.
Another turning point, a fork stuck in the road.
The sellout of all sellouts, punks writing a prom theme.
I hope you had the time of your life.
And it's funny to think that this was like actually a thing that people cared about in the 90s, but after that they had kind of one middling album and then they fell off the radar for several years. And I'm including all of this because Green Day is just about the last band you would ever expect to be like political, the voice of the resistance, especially in an atmosphere where the most successful political music is.
'Cause we'll put a boot in your ass, it's the American way.
There's a lot to unpack here. The tone, the aesthetic, an exploration of an entire generation and country feeling duped, but, you know, a happy one.
Now everybody to the propaganda and sing along to the age of paranoia.
Like the album it's a grenade, but, you know, a heart-shaped one. A lot of the tie-in art, marketing, music video used a lot of wartime imagery, but, you know, like a punk Hot Topic version. The lead single, of course, was American Idiot. And when you compare it to stuff like The System of a Down or Perfect Circle song, this one kind of hits the combination of upbeat and angry that was just where we were in 2004, a time when the top 40 was aggressively apolitical. The song succeeds in the same way that Creedence did, by being kind of tongue-in-cheek. So you could make the argument that Green Day is our generation's Creedence. American Idiot is our Fortunate Son.
The representative from California has the floor.
Less remembered but more deliberate is the single Holiday.
Pulverize the Eiffel Towers, who criticize your government.
And the choruse's refrain
On holiday.
was, according to Armstrong, intended to reflect the average American's apathy on the issues of the day. And then there's the really big hit off that album,
Wake me up when September ends.
perhaps the obvious parallel to Time of Your Life, Wake Me Up When September Ends. The more sincere counterpoint to American Idiot, and one of their biggest hits of all time, it's basically a song about not wanting to live through the time you're in. Wow, good thing we don't have that on Wii anymore. If Holiday is anger at the apathy, September kind of leans into it. Although the music video seems less anti-war than the previous ones, as it has a lot more sympathy for the soldier. Aesthetically, it's not that far from Toby Keith's American Soldier.
I don't do it for the glory, I just do it anyway.
American Idiot and Green Day in general had a musical, which did have a soldier goes to war element. I didn't see it. It wasn't a complete failure, but it didn't really stick around, which might be indicative of it not belonging in the time it was released, in the 2010s. Like, imagine a Creedence musical in the 1980s.
I never thought I'd end up doing Broadway.
Me neither, Billy Joe. So, I guess my hot take is maybe Green Day is good, actually? Even relatively popular artists like Eminem and System of a Down didn't really figure out how to make any art that stayed in the popular lexicon the way Green Day did. And part of it, like with the Black Eyed Peas, was that Green Day was palatable to the mainstream because they don't mention Bush or Iraq by name. But this isn't a bad thing. They have this in common with a lot of protest music, from Irish music that made allusions to the British, all the way to the music of the Vietnam War. Just the complete on-the-noseness, like, of calling people sheep while Bush surfs through a river of blood just feels preachy. This was just not an era for political activism through art and music, leaving Green Day the only act that managed to thread the needle and get a big hit out of it. Before the 2004 election. Speaking of which...
Thank you all for coming. We had a long night. The voters turned out in record numbers and delivered an historic victory.
Bush gets reelected, and I guess the trend of anti-Bush, anti-war punk rock seemed just kind of like a waste of time.
Look at this photograph.
Like, this is it. This is where we live now. You see less protest songs so much as generally being resigned to this being the way things are. Not a lot of fighting the establishment in the music.
Where have we gone wrong, America?
Sheryl Crow gave us God Bless This Mess.
Something has gone missing and it makes me kinda sad. Oh, God bless this mess.
Dar Williams gives us a less optimistic interpretation of the new America with Empire.
We like strong, happy people who don't think there's something wrong with pride. Work makes them free, and we spread that freedom far and wide, and the
has a much more empathetic plea with Dear Mr. President.
I'd like to ask you some questions if we can speak honestly.
There's gotta be a human man in there somewhere. LL Cool J had a similar song called Mr. President, which similarly made an empathetic plea, inquiring just what is going on in your head.
Mr. President, I would ask you about the war. Really and truly, what is it for? When an IED makes a soldier fall, is he dying for something above us all?
And Tori Amos had a short album track called Yo George.
Is this just the madness of King George, yo George? Well, you have the whole nation on the floor.
But on the whole, especially after the election of 2004, most mainstream art couldn't seem to bring itself to wholly or even partially condemn the establishment that the majority of people by now pretty much agreed was bad.
Check it out!
To me, the sound and the attitude of that era is best embodied with music like John Mayer's Waiting on the World to Change, a bad song that is bad and I hate it.
See everything that's going wrong with the world and those who lead it. We just feel like we don't have the means to rise above and beat it.
So here in 2006, one of the biggest hits of the year is effectively about riding out the bullshit.
It's hard to beat the system when we're standing at a distance, so we keep waiting.
Somehow John Mayer invented the opposite of a revolutionary song. And if it reminds me of anything, it reminds me of a song from Avenue Q called For Now.
George Bush is only for now.
So songs like Waiting on the World to Change and For Now
Not that we don't care, we just know that the fight ain't fair, so we keep on waiting.
kind of back up this idea that, you know, we tried, we fought, it didn't work, so right now we just have to wait it out. We will survive this.
Don't stress, relax, let life roll off your back.
So where does that put us today? How do we equivocate that era with this one?
This is America.
Well, the struggle is a lot more nebulous. The issue isn't this war is unjust. The issue is more everything is unjust. Much more common is the identity-based protest song, like Lady Gaga's Born This Way, or Taylor Swift's You Need to Calm Down. So it's not that protest music has gone away, but the thing that is being protested has become extremely broad. Protesting a war is a problem with a clearer solution, but today's big issues are harder to solve than send the troops home or vote this guy out of office. But from Taylor Swift all the way to celebrities singing Imagine,
Easy if you try.
No hell below us.
we can say this: at least there's no trend of songs proudly proclaiming their disengagement, or reassuring themselves that it'll be fine, we'll live through this, because I think that most people finally get that no, not everyone will live through this actually, and there is no guarantee that this is for now.
Don't stress, relax, let life roll off your backs. Except for death and paying taxes, everything in life is only for now.
So to bring this thing full circle, in December of 2016, former Dresden Dolls frontwoman and musician Amanda Palmer wrote the following. Being an optimist, there is a part of me, especially having studied Weimar Germany extensively, I'm like, this is our moment. Donald Trump is going to make punk rock great again. We're all going to crawl down staircases into basements and speakeasies and make amazing satirically political art. Similarly, author Joyce Carol Oates wrote, artists thrive on turbulence and estrangement from establishment/authority, so Trump presidency would not be a total disaster. For some. For some. Well, that's a caveat. So here's the thing that happens in times of great cultural stress. There's this sort of impulse to try to give meaning to the badness and the suffering. Like, if you put one suffering unit in, you get one art unit out. And I understand that impulse. You need to give meaning to, you know, the badness. But I think it's kind of misguided to give meaning to suffering by saying, hey, at least we'll get great art out of it. Amanda Palmer's comment about about Weimar Germany rings particularly tone-deaf in this context. Like, yeah, hey, the Holocaust sucked, but we got the producers, didn't we? And this tends to put stress on people that's also kind of unnecessary. Like, I'm at home, I haven't gone outside in months, there's a pandemic, and why have I not written the great American novel? Why have I not found a way to turn my suffering into art? Which is like perfectly encapsulated in this Onion headline. Man not sure why he thought most psychologically taxing situation of his life would be the thing to make him productive. But moreover, art and music, you know, it's great and all, but it's not a substitute for direct action.
George Floyd!
And there's no better evidence for that than these last couple weeks.
As he slides into position and goes straight into another really up song.
And I hope that we're kind of turning a corner on this mindset. Because while yes, a lot of incredible, meaningful art has come out of suffering, we should not think of suffering as a prerequisite for interesting and meaningful art. And we certainly shouldn't try to put a silver lining to people's suffering because consumers might get a good art out of it. Again, the pre-order link for my book is in the description. It has nothing to do with this topic, except for being set in the 2000s. Well, I guess it does have like some protesting in it, and George W. Bush is an extremely minor character. To be clear, this is the book about aliens, yes. So again, pre-order link in the description, and if you want a signed copy, by which I mean like, I sign this and then they stick it in like a page in the book, the instructions for that are also in the description. You have to do a whole thing that involves screenshots. Thank you for watching, and the video I was originally going to put up right now will be out soon. Soon.